Welcome everyone. We're going to be talking about the 16-bit era today, and we fall on, what do you call it? Two different sides of the fence on this. I grew up a Super Nintendo fan.
I grew up a Genesis fan. It wasn't necessarily that I grew up a Genesis fan. It was more that that was my only option. Being that five brothers, a couple of my brothers were very much Super Nintendo hogs. So I was able to get the Genesis all to myself, basically. Just to give a little, I guess, a brief history of us. We met when, our late teens. I was 18, probably 18, 19, something like that, when we met. So, it wasn't like Billy was like, oh, Super Nintendo, and I was like, oh, Genesis. We weren't like that with each other.
It was almost like that. We drew battle lines. And
yeah. We didn't even know each other, but we still drew battle lines. And
we came to fight. I drew a sword on you one night.
Well, that was completely unrelated, and
that was
alcohol were involved, yeah. But we're not supposed to mention that again, remember? It's disgusting. So we're gonna talk about the 16-bit era here.
I was highly anticipating the Super Nintendo because I was a Nintendo fanboy. Grew up with the NES, of course, and so I remember seeing screenshots of the Super Nintendo in a spread on Nintendo Power, and I was like, "Oh my god!" And I ran into the kitchen and showed my mother, and she was like, "No." And I started to cry, and she said, "No, still not getting one. I ain't gonna be. You got all these games." And at the time, I think I had like 5 Nintendo games. She said, "You got all these games. I ain't gonna be buying you no games for no system." And I'm like, "But Mom, it's Super." And she's like, "Ain't no 16 bits. Get out of here." Yeah, my mom talked like that, I guess. But
probably not.
Yeah,
probably not. I know Joanne, and no.
But
so
in
much.
all seriousness though, I had that. I was just like, I was obsessed with it at that point. Man, I've got to get a Super Nintendo, just like I was obsessed with getting a Nintendo before I had one.
But with me, it was like, we grew up with a lot of kids, 6 of us. We grew up with not a lot of money. So Christmas time was kind of special for us, where we would get like a Genesis. And for you parents out there with a bunch of kids, you buy one console and you say, "Here, kids, this is for everyone." And it saves you money. And
that's how I got my NES.
That's how we got our Genesis. The whole campaign, Genesis does what Nintendo don't, all that stuff, and the blast processing.
Genesis has blast processing.
I don't even know what the hell blast processing was. I still don't know what it is.
It's not even a thing.
I know it's not a thing.
But it was a heck of a marketing campaign because
yeah. Well, the commercials, you had the drag racer.
What could you say as a Nintendo fan? And somebody said, "Well, Genesis has blast processing." At that point, it was checkmate. Well, that was your response.
When if you actually get real rue on it and geek it out, like match them up, whatever the hell numbers they match up, Nintendo is pretty much. Super Nintendo is pretty much superior.
Yeah, except for like the one thing, speed.
Right.
And then that was it. That was like, well, blast processing. Blast processing.
Right. Blast processing.
But for me...
And I hated the Sega Genesis. I'll admit it, because I was a Nintendo fanboy. I was like, Sega Genesis, no. I saw them as competitors. I did. I was just like that.
I didn't. And no, at the time, like, the console wars were huge at the time. And it's... you either fell on one side of the fence or the other. I didn't. I wasn't like, oh, Sega Genesis is awesome, and Sonic could beat the crap out of Mario, and I wouldn't like that, My brothers were constantly on the Super Nintendo. Constantly. I couldn't get to it. So I had the Genesis all to myself. I could wake up on Saturday morning, watch my freaking cartoons. When Saturday morning cartoons ended and Saved by the Bell came on, that was the last good show. I'd go to the Genesis and I'd play Genesis all day long. My sports game fetish carried over from Nintendo to Genesis. And actually, funny I say that, Genesis is when I really started to branch out and play other types of games. I played Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat, of course. This is like Genesis is when I got into a I guess a guilty pleasure when it comes to games. I really, and to this day, I still do. I love like kids games.
I did too.
I
Disney
like
games.
Disney, especially, right? Like Aladdin. You know, I played that one a lot. Beauty and the Beast. I love, Lion King, and it's a guilty pleasure of mine. I like kids games.
Well, I mean, the Mickey Mouse games on the 16-bit consoles were some of the best games on them.
Yeah. Yeah, they were.
So, the way I got my Super Nintendo is pretty much the exact same story of how I got my NES.
Con grandma out of it.
Con my grandmother out of it. But this time it was a Christmas gift. It wasn't just kind of out of the blue because they just wanted to hear me shut up about it. And so the games that I picked to get with the Christmas gift for all the kids to play actually ended up being some of my favorite games, and it actually didn't even strike out at all. It ended up being Pilot Wings, which I love, Super Castlevania 4, Contra 3, and UN Squadron. And then of course we had Mario World, and so it was like the whole year I was set playing those games. It was so amazing. Then my favorite game on the Super Nintendo is Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past.
That's your favorite game of all time.
This is my favorite game of all time, actually. If I could take one game and then I'll only play it forever, it'd be this one. Other favorite games on the system: Soul Blazer, and of course Chrono Trigger, which I never played until recently because I wasn't into RPGs during the Super Nintendo time. The Super Nintendo was an RPG powerhouse, yet I missed on a whole genre because I didn't understand them, for one thing. I just didn't understand how RPGs worked. I was more into the action platformers, stuff like that. But
Pitfall. I did play Pitfall on Super Nintendo. I remember playing that one. That was fun. I played more as an adult than I ever played as a kid. Super Nintendo. Even Super Mario World.
You played this the first time you played Super Mario Brothers World. Wasn't it like with Kelly?
The first time I played Super Mario World, I remember watching Dodongo play it. Dodongo was like I don't know, like a Rain Man with that game. He could run through it and like flawless. And he gets to the end, and every time that thing Bowser was on would cry, he'd say that Snoop Dogg, a tear drops my eye. Every single time he would, I swear, every time he would do that.
A little side note: the one game that I've seen Dodongo just destroy, and I've never seen anybody else do that, is the original Ninja Gaiden.
Gaiden?
Yeah, the original Ninja Gaiden. Yeah.
Dodongo is pretty badass when it comes to Mike Tyson, actually, too, on Mike Tyson's Punch-Out. He is, I don't know, I guess his fingers are too fast for Mike Tyson. I've been to Mike Tyson. I can get to Mike Tyson like clockwork. Once I get to Mike Tyson, it's game over. I've beaten Mike Tyson once, but we're getting off topic here.
Yeah, of course. We had the Super Nintendo. That's all we'd play. Of course, eventually those first 5 games would get old. We'd rent more games. The funny thing is, though, my sister became a trader. And that's how I saw it, because one year for her birthday, she's like, or maybe it was for Christmas, I don't even remember at this point, but she was like, Mom, I want a Sega Genesis. And I'm like, you animal! Why would you want to do that? And so she ended up getting a Sega Genesis. And I don't know, maybe she was just rebelling against me or whatever. But I remember one time I snuck into my sister's room. And usually I didn't do that because she has these little porcelain dolls up on the shelves. And you know those porcelain dolls that have the dark eyes? And God,
creepy
they creep
looking,
me
yeah.
out. I always imagine those things coming to life and like standing on my bed while I'm asleep, but
Kind of like
the
Puppet
different
Master.
story, exactly, just like Puppet Master, or Dolls. Have you seen the movie Dolls?
I haven't
Check
seen
out
that
the
one.
movie Dolls. So I snuck into her room one time, played the Sega Genesis, played Sonic, and I was like, it's all right. I was like, oh, okay, I can see how people like this, and so I'd play it every once in a while. Now I realize the Sega Genesis was actually pretty cool.
Sega Genesis was cool. It had some really good games on it. Echo the Dolphin looked good. I couldn't ever get anywhere on that game. It aggravated the hell out of me. But the game looked good. It looked really good. You had Genesis, you had Super Nintendo, one side or the other. But the bottom line is, both great consoles.
And if you've never played one, play it, whether it be Super Nintendo or Genesis. Check them out.
Check them out, yes.
So we appreciate everybody watching, listening to us ramble on about our past like this, and just remember,
that's just the way game playing go.